So we got to the last video of this lesson, and in the past 2 hours or so you've been learning a lot about how sex and sexuality developed in the last 200,000-300,000 of years. So how is sexuality going to look like in 100, 500 or maybe 1,000 years from now? Because we've been developing for so long, but we're not at the end of an evolutionary process. Humans are still changing even now. So what can we say? I mean, we know what happened in the past, but can we somehow extrapolate? Is there some kind of means of looking at the future? Well, actually there is. Spiral dynamics has 3 more stages: the yellow, the turquoise and the coral stages. Now, there is not a single society on Earth that is fully in the yellow or turquoise and let alone the coral stage, but there are some people who already have some of these values, so we have some kind of preview already. But still, I do believe that this allows us to already make some kind of predictions of how sex is going to look like in the future. Of course, I cannot say anything with any certainty, so this is very much how I think things are going to change. Now, many people think that we have sex robots coming up and that sex is going to change completely because you no longer need sexual interaction for procreation. With in vitro fertilization, you don't need a sexual act anymore. Also, in terms of human bonding, you don't need sex anymore. I mean, you can do it. You can have bonding without sex. Also the recreation, you don't need other humans for that. I mean, if you're going to have toys, why would you do it with a human? Why would you want to spend so much time and energy in the orgasm of the other if you can just have a robot that doesn't care? Well, actually, I think this is not going to happen. When we think about sex robots, we're still in this orange mindset, where it's all about more, faster, better, very egocentric. But I do believe that humans are really changing in terms of consciousness. I do believe that the future looks a little bit brighter than what we might think of if we're projecting our contemporary ideas on the future. Now, let's start with marriage and sex. What about marriage in the future? Well, I think we will go back to the basics. I think we will go back to some kind of stage which is very similar to beige and turquoise, but with the difference that there is going to be a higher level of consciousness, a higher level of acceptance and love and caring and compassion. Now, to me, this means that most likely marriages will no longer exist. Why? Why was marriage as a legal system invented? Basically because there was no trust, because there was an abuse of the situation. As we saw, marriage was basically based on the fact that people promised to take care of each other. And a legal system only needed to be enforced because people were not taking this promise seriously enough. So I do believe as we will go further in our cognitive and in our heart development, people will start taking their own promises and their own commitments much more serious. So I do believe that there is going to be less a breaking of these laws, so there is not going to be a necessity for these laws. The same is also going to happen with regards to sex. It's not going to be regulated that much by laws and social norms anymore, but more by personal values of respect, responsibility and mutual care. So I actually think that in the future, marriage is going to be replaced by something even better, by responsibility. Now, if there is no marriage, you cannot have any pre, extra or post-marital sex. But does that mean that people will live in full monogamy? Well, I don't think so. But still, one key principle will remain very crucial, and that's honesty. Because as we saw, during the different stages of human development, there were stages where consensual non-monogamy was allowed, but cheating was never allowed, and I think that's going to stay the same in the future. It's all about the honesty. But there is another part to the honesty. Honesty is not only about cheating and monogamy or non-monogamy. It's also about being honest to yourself. In our contemporary society, many people are not too satisfied with their sex lives, but they're not honest to themselves. They're trying just to say, well, not everything can be fine, or well, it's not that important, or sex is not a good thing in any case. But they're also lying to their partner. They're not telling what they really feel. They're not really telling their real needs. So I think in the future, people will be more honest to themselves and to their partners about their sexual needs. So what about prostitution? Well, I think again we'll go back to an older system where it's not really clear if a sexual relationship is prostitution or based on some kind of mutual care. So I do believe that we will have some kind of remnants of prostitution, but there is going to be a more genuine caring for each other. Sexual orientation and gender identity. Big question in our contemporary society, but what about the future? I think we will still have issues around this, but it's no longer going to be at the forefront. It's no longer going to be a major challenge to humanity. I believe that heterosexuality is going to stay the norm just as it has always been. Homosexuality will still be accepted, tolerated. People who are homosexual will be seen just like anybody else. However, homosexuality, I believe, is not going to be seen as the natural thing. If we're looking at gender identity, I think that the same will apply here. There is going to be a lot of tolerance and acceptance towards transgender people, towards non-binary people, and so on, as long as it is not rooted in a psychological conflict. Because I do believe that if we're looking at transgenderism, for some people it is really something genuine, something that's come really from the depth of their heart. It's linked to their essence. But in other cases, I do believe it is linked to some kind of problem of their own identity, a problem of not finding themselves in society. What about sexual education then? Well, I think we will start listening again to our inborn intelligence. Our body actually knows what the best way for having sex is. So I think we will start tapping back into this natural wisdom. But on top of that, people will have more open discussions on that again. And I think that we're seeing a start of that already. And I think as science is going to find more knowledge, and as we're having more access to some kind of spiritual concepts, healthy spiritual concepts of sexuality, bringing all of that together is going to form a very good and a healthy basis for discussing sexuality. So I believe sex is going to be a topic that can be discussed like anything else, just like we will be talking about other taboos now about death, for example, but just like we will be talking about how we enjoy going on holidays, what hobbies we have, and so on. Sexuality will be an issue that is going to be open for discussion. I already alluded to sex and spirituality, and I believe that sex will again be seen as a powerful energy in the world. It will again be seen as something divine, but I believe that contrary to what we have in the green stage, it's not going to be as idealized or romantic or even delusional. Now, the last thing that I also want to discuss here are the sexual values and the moral norms. Also here, I think we will go back to the basics. And then I'm very much looking with regards to monogamy. 100 years ago, people were not fixated on monogamy. They were not striving for monogamy. And neither were they striving for non-monogamy. It just happened. Some people just happened to live in a monogamous relationship, and other people just happened to live in non-monogamous relationships. It was just some kind of natural way of finding the best way for survival. And I believe the same will happen again in the future. I think that some people will live in monogamous relationships and they will be very satisfied with that. And other people will live in non-monogamous constellations Again, maybe there will be 2, 3 partners, but I do not believe that we'll have a system where everybody will be having sexual relationships with everybody, because that would go against the whole principle of care. And as we're going higher in our levels of consciousness, I do believe that we will start caring much more about the people we have sex with. I also believe that the neurotic aspect of sex is going to decrease. Actually, the neurotic aspect of sex is something that we're going to discuss in the next videos, because everything that relates to the distortion of the sexual function through the lens of our Enya type, I think is no longer going to exist. We will talk about that in much more detail later. And finally, I think that also the use of sex toys and porn is going to decrease tremendously. Now, we got to the end of this lesson. I hope that you found this alternative history lesson very interesting. And I hope that it has really challenged your thoughts, your ideas about how you think about sex and sexuality. You don't need to change your values, because whatever your values are, they're probably the best values for you at this point in your life. But what I want you to do is actually to start thinking, to what extent are your values the best or natural? I want you to challenge some views that you may have about the superiority of your values. You may look at other people having some kind of backward or unhealthy attitudes towards sex. But just look at it as just different approaches to survival. So in this lesson, we basically looked at how the cognitive mind influences human sexuality at a collective level. Now, in the next lessons, we're going to look at how the cognitive mind influences sex and sexuality at an individual level. So all through the lens of our Enya type. And of course, the two are very much interlinked. So let's move on to the next lesson.